read one book a day, and tonight we're diving into Pride and Prejudice. Have you ever found yourself labeling someone based solely on a first impression in a social setting, then missing the chance to get to know them deeply because of that preconceived judgment? Or perhaps, when making certain life choices, you've been swept up by the voices of others and societal norms, losing sight of what you truly want, even unconsciously building walls with arrogance or blinding yourself with prejudice. We all stumble through interpersonal relationships, wavering between self-perception and the evaluations of others. But these struggles were already written into this book by Jane Austen over 2 centuries ago. It's not just a classic love story. It's more like a mirror, reflecting the arrogance and prejudice that may exist in each of us, and holding the answers to how we relate to ourselves and others. The story begins when Netherfield Park, an estate in the town of Meryton, Hertfordshire, welcomes its new owner, a young and wealthy gentleman named Mr. Bingley. This news was like a stone thrown into a calm lake, causing quite a stir in the local gentry circle. For the mistress of the Bennet family in particular, it was a godsend. Mr. and Mrs. Bennet have 5 unmarried daughters: Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia. According to the law of the time, the Bennet family property would be inherited by their distant nephew, Mr. Collins, meaning that once the daughters lost their parents' protection, they would be left homeless and helpless. Therefore, finding good marriages for her daughters became Mrs. Bennet's lifelong obsession. Her life revolved almost entirely around inquiring about eligible bachelors and figuring out how to make her daughters stand out in social settings. The Bennet's eldest daughter, Jane, is gentle, kind, and mild-mannered. She habitually sees the good in others and never readily blames anyone. Their second daughter, Elizabeth, the protagonist of our story, is quite different from her sister. She is intelligent and quick-witted, with insights and judgment comparable to those of men. What's even more admirable is that she has an unyielding stubbornness in her bones. She does not agree with her mother's view of marriage as a means of survival and longs for a love based on understanding and respect. In an era when women generally depended on men, Elizabeth's independence and clarity were like a little ray of starlight in the dark night, particularly dazzling. Soon after, Mr. Bingley held a grand ball at Netherfield Park, inviting all the prominent figures in the area, and the Bennet family was naturally among them. On the night of the ball, the hall was brightly lit, filled with elegant dresses and the melodious sound of dance music echoing. Mr. Bingley's appearance immediately won everyone's favor. He was handsome, gentle, and graceful when dancing, and soon developed a mutual affection with Jane Bennet. Accompanying Bingley were his sisters, his brother-in-law, and his close friend, Mr. Darcy. As soon as Mr. Darcy appeared, he attracted everyone's attention with his striking appearance and considerable wealth. He was tall and handsome, dressed in an exquisite suit, and every gesture exuded aristocratic elegance. At first, people thought he would be as approachable as Mr. Bingley, but soon they realized that Mr. Darcy was cold and arrogant, seeming to have an air of detachment from those around him. He rarely took the initiative to talk to others, only danced a few symbolic dances, and mostly just nodded politely in response to others' overtures. Elizabeth first noticed Darcy when everyone was talking about him. She originally had no particular prejudice, against this reputedly wealthy gentleman. But what happened next made her feel a deep dislike for him. At that time, Mr. Bingley tried his best to persuade Darcy to ask Elizabeth to dance. He smiled and said to Darcy, "Darcy, look how lovely Miss Elizabeth is. You should ask her to dance." Darcy followed Bingley's gaze to Elizabeth, his eyes sweeping over her clothes and the surrounding environment, then shook his head coldly and said softly, "She is tolerably handsome, but not handsome enough to tempt me. I am in no humour at present to give consequence to young ladies who are slighted by other men." And these words were overheard by Elizabeth, who was standing not far away. A surge of anger immediately welled up in Elizabeth's heart. She was not angry because she had been rejected, but because of Darcy's arrogance. He had casually dismissed a person based solely on appearance and family background, placing himself on a pedestal. Elizabeth thought to herself, no matter how much wealth or high status you have no right to look down on others like this. Everyone has their own dignity. Who are you to judge others by your own standards? From that moment on, Elizabeth labelled Darcy as arrogant, selfish, and indifferent. This prejudice took root in her heart like a seed. After the ball, Jane fell ill from getting caught in the rain and had to stay at Netherfield Park to recover. When Elizabeth heard the news, she was immediately worried. Ignoring the cold weather and the muddy roads, she put on simple clothes and walked to Netherfield Park on foot to visit her sister. Along the way, the rain soaked her skirt and mud stained her shoes, making her look a bit dishevelled when she appeared at Netherfield Park. Mr. Bingley and Jane were delighted to see her, but Bingley's sisters sneered at Elizabeth's appearance, secretly whispering behind her back that she was vulgar in manner and lacking in etiquette. Mr. Darcy, however, felt an unfamiliar stir in his heart the moment he saw Elizabeth. Watching her anxious expression for her sister and her determination to come on foot regardless of her appearance, he suddenly realized that this girl was completely different from the pretentious, aristocratic young ladies he had met before. Her eyes were clear and firm, and she carried an unpolished vitality. Darcy began to unconsciously pay attention to Elizabeth. He found that she was not only intelligent, but also very independent-minded, speaking clearly and coherently, and occasionally making witty remarks that carried a unique charm. But at this point, Elizabeth's prejudice against Darcy had not diminished in the slightest. She even grew more resentful of him because of Bingley's sister's admiration for him. She thought Darcy was cut from the same cloth as Bingley's sisters, people who valued family background above all else and looked down on others. Soon after, Elizabeth met a young army officer named Mr. Wickham. Wickham was handsome, elegant in speech, and gentle in manner, quickly gaining Elizabeth's trust and affection. By chance, Wickham talked to Elizabeth about Darcy. Putting on a wronged expression, he said to Elizabeth, "Miss Elizabeth, you may not know what a selfish and unfeeling man Mr. Darcy is. My father was once the steward of the Darcy family, and Mr. Darcy's father was very fond of me during his lifetime. He even made a will leaving me a generous inheritance to allow me to become a clergyman. But after Mr. Darcy inherited the family property, he went against his father's last wish, deprived me of my rightful inheritance, and left me in my current predicament." After speaking, Wickham put on a heartbroken expression. After hearing Wickham's words, Elizabeth's dislike for Darcy deepened. She fully believed Wickham's story, thinking that Darcy was not only arrogant, but also narrow-minded and ungrateful. She thought to herself, "Sure enough, my initial judgment of him was correct. He is a complete villain. How could he treat such a kind man as Wickham so badly? It's simply outrageous." From then on, whenever Elizabeth saw Darcy, she would put on a cold expression and even take the initiative to avoid him. Darcy, however, grew more and more fond of Elizabeth as he paid attention to her. He admired her intelligence, her independence, and her fearless attitude in the face of power and privilege. He knew his previous behavior had displeased Elizabeth, and he was aware that many people misunderstood him, but he didn't know how to explain. After struggling with his feelings for a long time, he finally decided to propose to Elizabeth. It was an evening, and the afterglow of the setting sun spilled over the courtyard, casting a warm golden hue over everything. Darcy found Elizabeth. His expression was a little nervous, and the usual arrogance in his eyes was replaced by a hint of unease. Taking a deep breath, he said to Elizabeth, "Miss Elizabeth, I know you may dislike me, but I can't help but tell you, I love you. I hope you will marry me." Elizabeth was stunned when she heard Darcy's proposal. She had never imagined that the man she hated so much would ask her to marry him. After a moment of surprise, overwhelming anger surged within her. She raised her head, looked at Darcy sharply, and said coldly, "Mr. Darcy, do you think I will accept your proposal? You are so conceited. I tell you, I will never marry a man as arrogant, selfish, and ungrateful as you." Darcy was shocked by Elizabeth's words. He had never expected his proposal to be rejected so fiercely. Frowning, he asked in confusion, "Miss Elizabeth, I know my previous behavior may have dissatisfied you, but I don't understand why you hold such deep prejudice against me." "Prejudice?" Elizabeth sneered. "Is not your arrogance a fact? At the ball that night, you publicly refused to dance with me, saying I was not worthy of your affection. Mr. Wickham, such a kind man, and you deprived him of his rightful inheritance, leaving him in distress. What's more, you sabotaged my sister's relationship with Mr. Bingley, preventing them from being together. You've done so many terrible things, and you have the audacity to say I have prejudice against you." Elizabeth's words were like a sharp knife piercing Darcy. Looking at her angry expression, he knew how deeply she misunderstood him. He did not argue further, only glanced at Elizabeth deeply, then turned and left. The next day, Darcy sent Elizabeth a letter. Elizabeth initially didn't want to read it, but driven by curiosity, she finally opened it. In the letter, Darcy explained the truth about everything in detail. He said that Wickham was not a kind man at all. On the contrary, he was a dishonest gambler, burdened with heavy debts. Darcy's father had indeed given Wickham a sum of money to study to become a clergyman, but after receiving the money, Wickham did not study at all. Instead, he squandered it all and came back to ask Darcy for more. When Darcy refused, Wickham spread rumours everywhere to slander Darcy. Regarding Bingley and Jane, Darcy also explained that he had tried to stop them from being together because he mistakenly thought Jane did not have genuine feelings for Bingley and only valued his wealth. Fearing that Bingley would be hurt, he persuaded Bingley to leave. Darcy wrote in the letter, "I know what I did was selfish, failing to consider Jane's feelings or Bingley's sincerity. I apologize for my actions." After reading the letter, Elizabeth was completely stunned. She couldn't believe that Wickham, whom she had always trusted, was a liar, and even more so that she had wronged Darcy for so long because of her prejudice. Her heart was filled with guilt and remorse. She thought to herself, "I always thought I was smart enough to see the true nature of people, but I never imagined that I would be blinded by appearances, easily dismissing someone based solely on a first impression and the rumors of others. Am I not just as guilty of prejudice as Darcy?" From that moment on, Elizabeth began to reflect on her behavior. She no longer let prejudice cloud her judgment, but learned to look at the people around her with an objective eye. She started to pay attention to Darcy's every move, realizing that he was not as arrogant as she had imagined. Once, she visited Darcy's estate, Pemberley. The housekeeper and servants of the estate spoke highly of Darcy, saying he was kind to others, often helped the poor in the village, and was very friendly to his servants. As Elizabeth listened to these words, her affection for Darcy grew little by little. Darcy, too, after being rejected by Elizabeth, began to reflect on his arrogance. He realized that the reason he had offended so many people was that he had placed too much emphasis on his own status and position, ignoring the feelings of others. He began to learn to put aside his pride, take the initiative to care for others, and treat those around him with sincerity. Just as their relationship was gradually improving, a great misfortune befell the Bennet family. The youngest daughter, Lydia, because of her youth, impulsive personality, and love of excitement, eloped with Wickham. In society at that time, a woman eloping was a shameful act that not only ruined her own reputation, but also brought disgrace to the entire family. Mr. and Mrs. Bennet were beside themselves with anxiety. Mrs. Bennet even fainted from crying. When Elizabeth heard the news, she was also extremely worried, fearing for Lydia's safety, and even more worried that the family's reputation would be ruined. Just as everyone was at a loss, Darcy learned of the incident. Without the slightest hesitation, he immediately used his connections and wealth to search everywhere for Lydia and Wickham. In the end, he found them, paid off all of Wickham's debts, arranged a job for him, and made him promise to marry Lydia. Darcy did all this without telling the Bennet family. He did not want Elizabeth to think he was condescending, nor did he want others to know about his efforts. Later, Elizabeth still learned the truth from her aunt. She was moved to tears, never expecting Darcy to do so much for her family. She completely let go of her prejudice against Darcy and finally understood her feelings for him. She knew that she had deeply fallen in love with the man she had once misunderstood. Soon after, Darcy proposed to Elizabeth again. This time, his expression was no longer arrogant, but full of sincerity and unease. Looking at Elizabeth, he said softly, "Miss Elizabeth, after all these things, I know I have done many things wrong. I have tried to correct my arrogance, and I hope you can give me another chance to take care of you for the rest of my life." Looking into Darcy's sincere eyes, Elizabeth nodded with a smile and said, "Mr. Darcy, I have also done many things wrong. I once wronged you because of my prejudice. Now I am willing to marry you." On the wedding day, the sun was shining brightly. Elizabeth, wearing a white wedding dress, took her father's arm and walked step by step towards Darcy. Darcy stood at the end of the church, looking at her gently with a happy smile on his face. Jane and Bingley were also there. After the previous twists and turns, they had finally come together. Watching the happy scene in front of them, everyone showed a relieved smile. In addition to the love stories of Elizabeth and Darcy and Jane and Bingley, there are two subplots in the novel that are also worthy of our deep consideration. One is the marriage between Elizabeth's friend Charlotte and Mr. Collins. Charlotte was an intelligent and sensible girl, but she came from an ordinary family and was not getting any younger. In society at that time, it was difficult for her to find a good marriage. Although Mr. Collins was rigid, hypocritical, and very snobbish, he had a stable income and the right to inherit the Bennet family property. To secure a stable life, Charlotte chose to marry Mr. Collins. After marriage, although she had no love, she lived a peaceful and stable life. Charlotte once said to Elizabeth, "I never expected to find love in marriage. I only hoped to have a home of my own, no longer dependent on others." The other subplot is the story of Bingley's sister and Darcy's cousin, Georgiana. Bingley's sister was determined to marry her son to Georgiana, to curry favor with the powerful Darcy family. She always put on an arrogant air, looking down on people from ordinary families, and ultimately failed to get her wish. Georgiana, although born into an aristocratic family, was gentle and kind, and very dependent on Darcy. She had once been almost seduced and abducted by Wickham, but fortunately, Darcy stopped it in time. These different love and marriage storylines are like different mirrors, reflecting the different fates of women in British society at that time. Some bravely defied societal prejudice for the sake of love. Some helplessly compromised to secure a stable life. Others were drawn into power struggles because of their privileged backgrounds. As we reach the end of Pride and Prejudice, it's easy to see that Austen never intended to write just a simple love story. Instead, through this love affair, she explores profound themes of human nature, social class, and self-growth. Darcy's arrogance stems from the sense of superiority brought by his aristocratic status, a superiority that made him accustomed to looking down on others and ignoring the equality and respect between people. Elizabeth's prejudice, on the other hand, arises from her resentment of arrogance and her overconfidence in her own judgment. This prejudice blinded her to the truth, almost making her miss the man who was truly right for her. In that era of rigid social stratification, arrogance and prejudice were widespread social phenomena. The aristocracy, relying on their wealth and status, were full of arrogance toward the lower classes, while the lower classes, out of dissatisfaction with the aristocracy, harbored prejudice. This arrogance and prejudice not only hindered communication and understanding between people, but also trapped many in painful predicaments. Just like the Bennet sisters, whose marital choices were always constrained by class and wealth. Just like Charlotte, who had to give up her pursuit of love for a stable life. Even today, we can still see the shadows of arrogance and prejudice in our lives. In the workplace, some people treat new employees with disdain because of their position and seniority. That is arrogance. In daily life, some people casually label others based solely on their clothing or occupation. That is prejudice. In social interactions, some people distance themselves from those they consider inferior because of their own sense of superiority. That is arrogance. Online, some people arbitrarily criticize and insult others over trivial matters. That is prejudice. These forms of arrogance and prejudice are like invisible walls, isolating people from warmth and trust, and leading us further and further into loneliness and misunderstanding. But Pride and Prejudice tells us that arrogance and prejudice are not insurmountable. After being rejected by Elizabeth, Darcy did not stubbornly cling to his arrogance. Instead, he chose to reflect on his actions, learn to put aside his pride, and treat others with sincerity. After learning the truth, Elizabeth also did not stubbornly hold on to her prejudice. Instead, she chose to admit her mistakes and learn to look at the people around her with an objective eye. Both of them grew, striving to overcome the flaws in their personalities and ultimately achieve self-redemption and gained sincere love. The inspiration this book offers us, modern readers, may lie in this. In this era of impetuosity and anxiety, we need to learn to let go of arrogance and prejudice more than ever, and maintain a humble and tolerant attitude. When dealing with others, we should not rush to judge based solely on first impressions. Instead, we should be more patient and understanding, trying to listen to others' voices and understand their stories. When dealing with ourselves, we should learn to reflect on our actions, have the courage to admit our mistakes, and constantly improve our character. At the same time, Pride and Prejudice makes us rethink the meaning of love and marriage. In today's materialistic society, many people take wealth, status, and appearance as the primary criteria for choosing a partner, just like Mrs. Bennet, who saw marriage as a means of survival. But Austen tells us that true love is not built on wealth and status, but on mutual understanding, respect, and tolerance. Just like Elizabeth and Darcy, the reason they were able to come together was not because of their wealth or status, but because they could see the beauty in each other's hearts and support and achieve each other in the process of growth. Furthermore, this book allows us to see the independence and awakening of women. In an era when women had low social status, Elizabeth dared to break free from societal constraints, pursue the love she wanted, and uphold her independent personality, a spirit that is invaluable. Even today, this spirit is still worthy of our learning. Women should not be accessories to men, nor should they be defined by societal norms. We have the right to pursue our dreams, the right to choose the life we want, and the right to have our own independent personality. Pride and Prejudice is like a cup of warm tea. Reading it slowly late at night always fills us with warmth and strength. It teaches us that growth is a process of constantly letting go of arrogance and eliminating prejudice, and that the most beautiful form of love is two independent souls attracting and nurturing each other. In this uncertain world, we are all searching for our own happiness, and this book tells us that happiness is never obtained through waiting or demanding, but through our own efforts and growth. No summary can replace the original work. A good book is worth reading, page by page. Good night, and wish you a sound sleep tonight. I'm Time for Bed. If you like it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I look forward to our next encounter.